Please welcome former Governor of Texas, Rick Perry.
Good turnout. You did good.
So, Governor, you've been a frequent visitor to Iowa. Is the
Love
weather a little bit
love
better?
The weather up here.
Is it a little better this
It's
time
good up
than
here.
4 years ago?
I don't even remember 4 years ago. So, no, the weather's fine. Actually, last year was the one when you guys had a real winter. Somebody told me that it was frozen to 8 feet deep. Now, we're used to a little bit of cold weather back in Texas, but not that. It would have shut down our, as a matter of fact, back in 78, I moved home and from the Air Force and went to farming and ranching again with my dad. I hope most of you know that I grew up on a dryland cotton farm 200 miles west of Fort Worth, Texas. And my mom and dad, my mom worked at a cotton gin. She was the bookkeeper. My dad farmed and drove a little heavy equipment. So 16 miles from the closest place that had a post office, in a house that didn't have running water until I was probably 6 or 7 years old. But I spent a lot of my youth in 4-H and showing club calves and Gold Star boy. So I think those of you in the agriculture community will respect that I know where you come from, what you've been through, and went off to school at Texas A&M to, I actually went to school to be a veterinarian, and that was my life dream, and organic chemistry had a little different idea about where I would go. And anyway, I ended up with an animal science degree, production option, and then flew in the Air Force for 4.5 or so years, then back to the farm and spent the next 14 years there farming with my dad. So that's the Cliff Notes version of my growing up. Spent 8 years as the agriculture commissioner. I was Bill Northy's I was Texas Bill Northy before Bill Northy was ag secretary. So anyway, just this long lifetime of being involved in the agriculture community and rural life, and then both as a state representative and the ag commissioner, and even as the governor of Texas, worked on a lot of issues to build up the rural infrastructure, whether it was bringing broadband out to our rural areas. And in 1992, I went to Israel and signed a memorandum of understanding with the state of Israel and the state of Texas on semi-arid land studies. We're in exchange of professors of different technologies to bring back to that semi-arid part of Texas. It looks a whole lot like Israel.
So that would bring up a good topic. Why don't we talk about foreign trade, the importance of agriculture, the Trade Promotion Authority for the president, and some negotiations going on today on TPP and other trade issues. If you're president, would you like to have Trade Promotion Authority?
Well, I think, and actually some of your earlier individuals who have been up here talked about, you got to have the right person in the White House to be able to negotiate. And to other, I happen to think that the next president of the United States needs to get up every day and try to put America in the best position, whether it's from the standpoint of the security of our food, whether it's the security of our energy, put America's trade. I want to be able to sell America's agriculture products all over the world, and so removing those barriers to trade, and knowing how to cut a good deal, if you will, for the industry of agriculture. So I do believe that the president, the way it's set up now, the president gets to negotiate these deals. Congress gets an up or down vote, you get the congressional engagement with that. I believe in that. I think that's a workable process. But again, somebody that actually understands the industry would be good to have in the White House that maybe is negotiated a deal or two. I look back on, I think executive experience is really important. Having hired people that you put in places, having negotiated deals before, and I'll give you a good example of how I differ from the current resident of the White House on the issue of executive experience. Ebola came on the shores of Texas, or in the shores of the United States. It just happened to be in Texas. I knew exactly who I wanted to put in to be the face of that of that effort, Dr. Brejois. He was a brilliant doctor. We had the opportunity to put a smart, bright physician in charge of our Ebola effort. He in turn gave protocols to the CDC that they hadn't even put into place. And the president finally chose somebody to be the Ebola czar, and it was a political spokesperson for Al Gore. I mean, I don't think it gives a lot of confidence to the American people, whether you see this president trying to do an agreement with Israel or whether it's with the TPP negotiations. There's not a lot of confidence that this president and or the people that he has working for him actually are working in the best interest of these men and women that are out here in this audience, particularly when it comes to trade for agricultural products. We need a president that not only understands it, respects it, and understands it for the future of this world. A strong American food industry, a strong America, and a secure energy industry is in the world's best interest.
So would you trade with Cuba?
The Cuban, we've got a pretty sordid history with Cuba when you get down to it. When you look at what's occurred, and I think I think this president, again, really missed the point. When you understand the Cuban relationship with their people, this is a regime that has been incredibly onerous to the people of Cuba. And if our point was we're going to trade with Cuba so that the people of Cuba actually get a better, find themselves in a better position, then that would have been a conversation worth having. But this administration basically empowered the Castro regime with no thought about helping the people. So my point is, I think we got a bad deal. I think we got a bad deal. I think the Cuban people got a bad deal. We traded Mr. Gross for 3 Cuban spies, and in my opinion, we got the way short end of that deal.
Okay, so oftentimes we don't have that same issue, challenges with China. What's different about all that, and how do you think about that in terms of some of those human rights issues involving trade?
Yeah. Well, number one, we got this long, as I refer to it, as a sordid relationship with Cuba. China's different. And China, I think, has the opportunity for us to come in to do trade with them. I've been on multiple trade missions to China, just as Terry Branstad has, and the relationship and building up there. I think there's the opportunity. What we see with China is they basically practice communism at night and capitalism in the daytime. And I think there's an opportunity for us through trade and for our ability to influence that country to really be engaged with them and to change the culture. I'm not sure you're ever going to change the culture of Cuba until Castro is dead and gone.
Okay. Let's talk about the RFS. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think obviously, I've got a record with the RFS as the governor of the state of Texas, and what we saw back in 2010, 2011 time period when I wrote a letter asking for some waivers from that was if you will, a bringing together of some really difficult drought conditions in the state of Texas and representing those individuals. And looking back on it, I made the right decision for the people of the state of Texas and the beef cattle producers at that particular point in time. Obviously, the subsidies have gone away. The RFS is out there in front of us. Here's what I will tell you and be real clear about. I don't think you pull the RFS out and discriminate against the RFS and leave all these other subsidies and mandates and other policies into place. I don't think Washington, D.C., whether it's on deciding what our children's curriculums need to be, deciding what our health care needs to be in these states, or for that matter, picking winners and losers when it comes to agricultural products. I think now, if the state wants to make some effort in that line, which we did with wind. I mean, Texas is the #1 wind energy producing state, followed closely by Iowa.
Do you support the extension of the wind tax credit?
I do if a state wants to do it. I don't at the federal level. I think all of these need to be looked at, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's the wind side, whether it's the RFS. I think all of them need to be put on the table, prove up whether or not these are in fact in the best interest of this country, Here's the bigger issue for me. A president that will go to work every day, I mean every day, trying to put trade policies into place where the products in Iowa and the products in Texas and agricultural products all across this country are being able to be sold into places outside the borders of the United States. That needs to be the real effort. And I will suggest to you, if we'll do that, then the subsidies and the mandates and all the other policies will become substantially secondary.
Okay, and not to press you on this, but market access is clearly what ethanol producers want. And then if they can't compete in the marketplace, but they have to have the ability to compete in the marketplace and have consumers buy that product or be able to choose voluntarily to buy it. How do you do that if you don't have the RFS there today?
Well, and again, I go back to, I think this is substantially more a state issue than it is a national issue. And that's what we did in the state of Texas on the wind side of things. I mean, we decided that we were going to subsidize the wind energy by the CREZ lines, our electrical lines, so you could bring the wind from out of West Texas and bring it into where the people are. And so I just fundamentally have a philosophical disagreement that Washington, D.C. needs to be empowered, whether it's educating our kids or delivering health care or, for that matter, policies. With all of that said, it's important for us to put policies into place that are an insurance for these agriculture producers. I mean, energy and food are major areas that we have to protect. And we know the ups and downs. I've sat on the end of a turn row and watched a wheat crop be lost to a hailstorm. As a matter of fact, not raining for a year had a change in my life. I was headed off to fly for Southwest Airlines in '78 after I got home and farmed for a year and a half and it quit raining. I mean, I understand the vagaries that can happen both from natural sources, natural disasters, and frankly, man-made events. I watched my wheat go to hell in a handbasket in 1978 when Jimmy Carter decided to boycott the Olympics. And those types of Washington-centric decisions are really disconcerting to me as a citizen. So my point is that if states want to put processes, policies, subsidies into place, that should be their call. But I philosophically don't agree that Washington, D.C. needs to be making these decisions that affect particularly, well, not particularly, but our agricultural industry.
Okay, an issue that Washington has yet not decided is immigration and what the appropriate direction in the U.S. is. You were governor of border state, major issue. You've talked a lot about it. And I think you also understand that agriculture is very dependent upon immigrant legal labor and the ability to work through those government programs and have that stable workforce. How would you suggest this country deal with that?
Well, I don't think that the American people are ever going to trust Washington to deal with this issue of immigration reform until they secure the border. We go back to '86 when President Reagan signed a piece of legislation, and I think it's pretty easily shown where he, if he had to do it again, he wouldn't have signed that piece of legislation because they said they were going to secure the border. We've heard that time after time after time. I've got some experience with this. Last summer, as I sat with the president and I invited him to come to the border so he could see the tragedy that was occurring there, not only with the unaccompanied minors. We had 10,000 plus apprehensions a week in that 150-mile region of the South Texas border with Mexico. The president refused to come and take a look at it. At that particular point in time, I knew that it was going to be Texas' responsibility. We had already sent our law enforcement. We'd sent our Texas Ranger recon teams. Our Parks and Wildlife were actually in the river. And just an FYI, the president didn't know that his border patrol was back 45 or 50 miles from the border in a apprehension position rather than in a prevention position on that border in the river, literally. So we deployed 1,000 of our National Guard troops to be a force multiplier. The result of that, Bruce, was that there was a 74% decrease in the number of apprehensions by November. Your common sense tells you that that will work. It will work in a neighborhood where there's been a crime spree, for instance, and it will work on our border. You secure the border with personnel, with strategic fencing, and I will suggest aviation assets that look down 24/7 and fast response teams, and you can secure the border. Then we can have the conversation about how to deal with this immigration issue. One of the first things I would do is to overhaul the agency that oversees immigration policies in this country. It is broken. The idea that it takes 7 or 8 or 10 years to become a citizen of this country is just incredible for me to get my arms around why we're that slow. The idea that bringing people into this country that we need, whether it's high-tech workers or whether it's people in agriculture or hospitality or construction, and being able to identify these people, keep up with them. I'm telling you, if UPS can track a box all around the world and know exactly where it is 24/7, we can give people a card and allow them in here and say that when you hit your visa limit from the time to be in this country, we're going to know where you are and we're going to let you know that your time's up, you're out of here. And that's what needs to happen in the country. And if we'll do that, then the American people will trust Washington to come up with a sensible immigration policy that will work. But if you don't get the border secured first, and you don't get that agency where it actually will function, then I think we're just going to continue to have the president's executive action is a result of Washington not getting their job done, and I think a president who doesn't respect the Constitution either, but that's a whole other issue.
Okay, let's go back to a comment you made about the showing club calves, and I assume that each year you wanted to show a better club calf.
I won the county fair the first show, and it was all downhill from there on out.
Most of the time it works the other way, but
yeah, I know.
That reference is in talking about genetic improvement of animals. And we continue to have a debate in this country, I think just starting, about GMOs and food labeling and organic food. What's your thoughts on the need to label GMOs?
Well, being in a cow-calf operation, I understand genetics. I understand about F1s and how to improve your herd. A boy who also was in the wheat business, Dr. Borlaug mattered to me. He was at Texas A&M, which is my alma mater. It's where he spent his last years. And I think about where would the world be today if we had some of the resistance to our genetic engineering and our ability to improve livestock and improve our seed stock, for instance. Dr. Borlaug is responsible for 1 billion lives being saved in the world. And we need to do a better job of explaining to people that it's safe, that it will make our farming and ranching more sustainable, that we can feed people around the world that are starving today, that are not getting the appropriate diets that they need. So listen, I don't have a problem. I was the agriculture commissioner in a state that grew a lot of livestock and a lot of vegetables. So the idea that I'm fine with organics. I mean, label organics. If you want to pay more for that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. There's a niche market out there. But for the bulk of the people, not just in this country, but in the world, to be able to explain to them how we safely, thoughtfully engineer our food supply in a way that truly allows them to live a better life is an important job for the President of the United States. It's an important job for a governor. It's an important for the leader of an ag industry. I think for all of us, whether you're on the Farm Bureau or whether you're in the Farmers Union, you need to be out there talking about the safe, abundant supply of food that the American farmer and rancher is developing and producing for the world.
Okay, real quickly, we're running out of time.
Great.
We often talk about the urban-rural divide in income levels, education, healthcare. What specifically did you do, if you did, to try and address that issue in Texas?
Well, spending 30 years in some form of public service, either as a state rep who represented 8 rural counties, one of the things that I really have a great concern about right now is what's happening in Washington. Again, this goes back to Washington getting in way more in our business than they need to, and it's about the access to capital. And Dodd-Frank, I will suggest, is one of the worst things that's happened to small community banks in my lifetime. And getting rid of Dodd-Frank and allowing the access to the capital, not just for the ag producers, but for the value-added processing. And that's what we really focused on when I was the ag commissioner, and subsequently when I was the governor as well, is helping create those value-added processing opportunities. It's the reason I think opening up the XL pipeline makes a lot of difference to this country, where we can continue to drive down the cost of electricity and we can have a manufacturing renaissance in this country. A lot of it's going to be in the agricultural states like Iowa, like Texas, like Oklahoma. And manufacturing, I will suggest, will put a lot of people to work in this country. You couple that with some corporate tax policies that give incentives to people to come build those manufacturing facilities back in America, and the best days of this country are in front of us. I know people are pessimistic today, but we're a couple of good decisions and a leadership change away from seeing the best days of America. I'll promise you that.
I think that's got to be the last word. Thank you.
Bruce, well done.
Appreciate you coming.
Yes, sir. Congratulations. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.